He had to show, through his actions, that he was committed to changing. It started with small steps. He made an effort to listen more intently to the people he served, to ask questions about their lives, and to listen to their answers. He no longer judged them based on how they looked or what they wore. Instead, he focused on who they were as individuals. He treated each guest with the respect they deserved, not because of their appearance or social status, but because of their humanity. Kyle also took it upon himself to start conversations with his coworkers, opening up in a way he had not before. He found that many of them shared similar struggles and similar insecurities. It was not just about serving food or earning tips. It was about understanding each other, recognizing the shared experiences that connected them. They were not just employees at a restaurant. They were people, each with their own hopes, dreams, and challenges. As time went on, Kyle started to feel a sense of fulfillment that he had not experienced before. He was no longer living in the bubble of his own narrow world, but was instead opening himself up to the lives of others. His relationships with his coworkers improved, and he noticed that the guests seemed to respond to him differently as well. There was a warmth in his interactions that had not been there before, an authenticity that came from genuinely caring about the people he served. One evening, as he was leaving the restaurant after another shift, Kyle bumped into Marcus again. This time the encounter was different. There was no awkwardness, no tension. Kyle smiled as he saw Marcus approach. "Mr. Preston," Kyle greeted him, his voice confident but respectful. "It is good to see you again." Marcus returned the smile, nodding. "Good to see you too, Kyle. How has everything been going?" Kyle did not hesitate. "It has been going well. I have been making an effort to be more aware of how I treat people, and it has been eye-opening. You were right when you said that it takes courage to face our mistakes." Marcus seemed genuinely pleased by the admission. "I am glad to hear that," he said, his expression warm. "That is all we can do. Try to do better every day." As they parted ways, Kyle could not help but feel a sense of pride, not because of what he had done, but because he had begun to understand something much deeper: the power of empathy, the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, and not for how they appear on the outside. The journey was not over. Kyle knew that. It would take time to fully undo the years of conditioning, the biases that had shaped the way he viewed the world. But now he was on the right path, and that in itself was something worth striving for. The experience had taught him more than he could have imagined. It was not just about an apology or a mistake. It was about growth, redemption, and the realization that we all have the capacity to change. We all have the ability to see the world in a new light, to make the conscious choice to be better. And as Kyle stepped into the world with new eyes, he understood that no matter who we are or where we come from, we all deserve respect, not because of the labels others place on us, but because we are human. So what about you? Have you ever judged someone based on assumptions? Have you ever had the courage to admit your mistakes and learn from them? Share your thoughts and remember, growth starts with us. The lion followed his senses, and suddenly on the dirt road, he spotted an abandoned, crying boy. Scout licked his lips and advanced toward the child. The little boy was sitting in the middle of the road. The hood of his blue jacket was pulled up over his head. He could not have been more than 3 years old, and his cries were loud and distressed. The lion kept his distance, but began to circle the little boy, never taking his eyes off the child. The sound was piercing, and Scout's behavior was changing by the second. The lion was now pacing back and forth, as if feeling conflicted about the situation. Suddenly he stopped. A new scent had emerged in the air. Scout sniffed, and his hackles raised. He locked eyes with the little boy, whose face was swollen from crying. Scout let out a terrifying roar, his teeth bared. The little boy was shocked into silence. Anger seemed to fill Scout's eyes, but the child noticed that the lion was not looking at him. He was looking over his shoulder. Suddenly, Scout charged toward the little boy and jumped over his head. A terrible thumping sound caused the little boy to turn around. Pinned on the floor was a second lion, and Scout was towering over him, roaring and swiping with his huge claws. The two lions engaged in a brief fight, but the second lion was no match for Scout. As Ethan made his way down the dirt road, unaware of the unbelievable sight that was about to greet him, the second lion struggled in an attempt to free himself from Scout's claws. The ranger rounded the corner and spotted the two lions fighting. Not an unusual sight in his job. But when he saw the little boy just a few feet away from the lions, he felt sick. He had no idea how a child had gotten into the reserve, but he knew the boy was in danger. Ethan stepped down on the pedal, launching his jeep at high speed toward the boy. The second lion freed himself from Scout's weight and limped away as the larger lion roared and turned back to the child. Ethan loved Scout more than anything in the world, but had he harmed the little boy, it would have been a disaster for the reserve. However, what happened next almost caused Ethan to crash his jeep in shock. The huge lion lay down next to the boy, creating a protective barrier around him as he scanned his territory to make sure there was nothing else around to harm the child. What Ethan had just witnessed was not a fight between two lions for food. Scout had been protecting the child. He had attacked the other lion to save the boy. Ethan thought back to the day he had found Scout whimpering up against his mother's body. Had he seen something in the crying child that resonated with him? Whatever had happened, Ethan was amazed. The ranger really hoped he had judged Scout properly, because even with the lion protecting him, he had to get the boy out of the road and find out what had happened. If Scout would not let him near the child, he did not know what he would do. Ethan cut the engine and slowly opened the Jeep door. Out of all the rangers at the reserve, Ethan was the only one Scout trusted. The young ranger could spend hours watching and tracking the lion without ever being bothered by him. Scout always knew he was there, but it was as if he still remembered Ethan rescuing him, which made him treat the ranger differently. Ethan just hoped that would now work in his favor as he stepped out of the safety of his car. Scout watched as Ethan edged closer, but the huge lion was in no rush to move. He looked the ranger up and down, as if assessing his trustworthiness. With one long stretch, he stood up and strolled away. Ethan patiently waited. He had passed Scout's test, and he was not about to ruin everything by rushing forward. When the lion was at a safe distance, Ethan scooped the child into his arms. With Scout by his side, the child seemed calm, but now that the lion was gone, the boy had started to cry again. Ethan had no choice but to hold on to the boy as he tried to drive carefully and slowly back to the office. All the while his mind was racing. Why had the child been abandoned on the road? He was still in shock over Scout's unbelievable actions as well. The quickest way to get answers about the boy was to review the CCTV footage in the hopes that it had captured something. When he reviewed the footage from the reserve boundaries, however, Ethan saw something that broke his heart. A battered old car came into view just outside the reserve boundary. Ethan could barely make out that the driver was a young man. After a few moments, a young woman climbed out of the car, holding a child. She looked around quickly and then seemed to spot what she was looking for, a weakness in the fence. After a few attempts, she pushed her way through with the child and placed him on the dirt track where Ethan had found him. The park ranger watched as the woman kissed the little boy on the forehead and then got back in the car without him. Ethan watched as the camera showed the little boy looking for his parents, but they were gone. Ethan felt more confused than ever. The forehead kiss had been tender and loving, and something told him that the woman had felt like she had no choice but to abandon the little boy. But why inside the reserve, where he would be in danger? Did she believe the security cameras would be monitored so the child would be picked up immediately? Did she think there was a ranger close by to rescue him? Ethan guessed he would never know all the answers to his questions. He was, of course, going to do everything he could to find the little boy's parents, but something told him that they were long gone. After viewing the footage, Ethan made something for the little boy to eat. The child seemed to have calmed down, so the ranger decided that now was a good time to try to get some information from him before he had to phone the authorities. The child looked frightened, however, and the most that Ethan could get from him was that his name was David. It was time to make some difficult phone calls. However, as Ethan spoke to the authorities, he watched David tentatively eat his food, and he was struck by a curious thought. Ethan had rescued Scout as a young cub when his mother died, and he had just witnessed that same lion protect a young child after his parents abandoned him. It was as if things had come full circle. Only this time, there would be no one to watch over the boy once he left Ethan's care, whereas Scout had always stayed with the ranger. The young man knew that desperation must have caused the child's parents to leave him. Some of the villagers around the reserve were poor, and Ethan knew that taking care of a child was expensive. He thought back to the footage he had seen of the young woman and David. desperately searching for his parents, and he was filled with sadness at what might happen to the child once he left the reserve. When the authorities arrived, David was watching videos on Ethan's phone. After eating some food, the little boy perked up and kept pointing outside, saying, "Lion," while making a roaring noise. The young ranger could not help but laugh at his enthusiasm. Ethan questioned the authorities about what would happen to the child. They explained that if they could not find any family members to take him in, he would be placed in an orphanage in the hope of being adopted. It seemed like an overwhelming amount of change and upheaval for such a young child, and Ethan did not want to think about how it would affect him. Before he could fully process what he was doing, the young ranger volunteered to take care of the child while the authorities searched for his family. It was a reckless decision. He had no experience caring for a child, but the little boy had captured his heart, much like Scout had all those years before. Just a few days later, however, Ethan received devastating news. David's family could not be found. The little boy would have to go to the orphanage. The young ranger stared at the child. In such a short time, he had settled in so well. Just the day before, Ethan had taken him out for a ride to see the lions, and the boy had squealed with delight at the sight of cubs running around. It had been magical to see the reserve he loved so much through a fresh set of eyes. Ethan knew that later in life, David would have questions about why he had been abandoned. And although no one could ever give him a definitive answer, there would be someone to tell him that his parents had loved him. Someone to tell him the story of the brave lion that had protected him and saved his life. That person would be Ethan. The young man's mind was made up. There would be no orphanage for David. The ranger would adopt him. The next few months were difficult as Ethan navigated the long adoption process to become David's legal guardian. But finally, when everything was settled, the new father and son set out for a drive to see the lions and celebrate their next chapter together. Basking in the late evening sun, not far from where David had been found, was Scout. As the Jeep slowly drove by, the lion noticed a little boy looking at him through the window. Scout lazily raised his head and gazed at the man who had now rescued not only him, but a child as well. Ethan could not wait to tell his son all about Scout's story as soon as he was old enough to understand. With a rescued lion and a rescued child forming his family, the ranger's life might have seemed unconventional, but he would not have had it any other way. Did you enjoy this story? How would you have acted in Ethan's place? Would you have adopted the child or sent him to the orphanage? Have you ever seen a lion in person? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Ethan truly proved that he has a big heart. Love always requires courage, not fear. Goodbye. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time. Have a wonderful day.